Let's talk about this concept of preemption, because this has come up in a couple of different stories, and it's fascinating to see who supports these type of things and why and what contexts.
Well, yeah, I mean, this story, first of all, the idea of the preemption we're talking about is where the notion is that a city only derives its power from what the state allows it to have. Same way that the states only derive their power by the same way by what the federal government says that they may have. So the way this has started being used all the way at maybe the 1980s, and what ends up happening is you'll see the story arise in places like where a city wants to say, we want to ban plastic bags because they're destroying the environment and they stay in the environment for thousands of years, and so you can't use plastic bags in our grocery store. Well, the state then comes back and says, well, that's something that we're in charge of as a state, and you can't do that. You're not going to be allowed to do that. You also see it with fracking, where you have Denton, Texas was a good example. Denton, Texas said, look, you're killing us. You are literally killing us. I mean, I don't mean that figuratively. You're poisoning our water. You're poisoning our children with excesses from your fracking process, and you're getting too close to us. You're getting close to our cities. You're getting close to contaminating our drinking water. So Denton said, we're going to ban fracking. And of course, the preemption argument is the state, with its packed right-wing frenzy, crazy right-wing legislature, comes back and says, oh, no, you can't do that because we're owned by the oil industry. Our legislature gets all their money from the oil industry. The media gets all their money from the oil industry. So it's a story that was underreported, but preemption destroyed the possibility of local government actually taking care of itself.
Yeah, and we also saw a similar dynamic in North Carolina. I mean, people don't realize that the North Carolina law that was passed, this anti-transgender law, among other things, frankly, was a reaction to Charlotte City Council passing a measure that extended civil rights protections for its entire LGBT community. And in literally the day or two before this law was supposed to kick into effect, the North Carolina state legislature passed a law that basically said no town or city can pass a law that is anti-discriminatory in this way. And of course, they threw in a bunch of other things in there. There was also stuff about you can't raise the minimum wage in your city. I mean, we have a lot of cities across this country where it's far more expensive to live in than it might be in the surrounding towns or the rest of the state. And but you don't want, if you are one of these reactionaries, you don't want the city to set a precedent. So you start to see a lot of this going on, which fights against the ability for people to exert any local self-determination.
Right. This was in Denton, Denton, Texas, for example. That was ballot. I mean, there was a ballot said, yeah, most of these places, these are voting ballots where the locality says, yeah, we don't want fracking. We don't want plastic bags, whatever it may be. We don't want discrimination. And then the state comes back and they take control of it. So basically what's happening is you're having American policy, American culture actually driven by this process of gerrymandering, which the Democrats, again, I can't say this enough times, the Democrats were warned about this. Bill Clinton specifically was warned about it. Says, look, Bill, you think you have it because you own the White House right now? You have these right-wing trolls that are taking over state by state, and they're going to determine American policy state by state. This is one example of that. And Bill Clinton laughed him off, saying, "Look, I'm Bill Clinton. I'm in the White House. We're in charge." No, they're not in charge. They're not in charge. And this is going to be let's see, the next time we're 2020, yeah, before we can do anything about it. So this is real suffering that these localities are going to have to endure.
Absolutely. I spoke to David Daly, who's just recently wrote a book about that that plan in 2010 or going into the 2010 election where the Republicans targeted these districts and sought to win these state houses so they could do this redistricting. And really, to a large extent, it's a story not just of the typical gerrymandering that has gone on for decades and centuries, really, in this country, but a gerrymandering that was made possible, a level of specificity that was made possible by technology and data. And then, of course, because you can do that around the country with all the data that was involved when you're around 2009, raising money for it and making it a national program became a lot easier. And that is what we're going to be fighting against. Whether or not the Democrats have embarked on that, I don't know.
Haven't.
I doubt it.
They're so far
Right.
behind. The DNC is just dysfunctional, and it was dysfunctional all the way back to the Bill Clinton days when they thought they were above the fray, that these dummies living in the various states, they just didn't amount to anything and they weren't important. And honestly, government's been taken over state by state, all the way down to elections about the school board, about county commissioners, and that's where the Republicans have been so smart. And regardless of how the Republicans explode or implode or whatever, regardless of what happens, they still control that gerrymandering card, and government doesn't really change. And this preemption story is a perfect example.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have Republicans now controlling the vast majority of state houses and governorships across the country, close to 2/3, I think, at this point, or maybe a little bit less. But and it's a real problem. Democrats have yet to address. You're right. We had one brief moment, I think, when Howard Dean was chair, and he was talking about a 50-state strategy, but that got thrown out the window.
TheRingOfFire.com. Honest, hard-hitting news, free from corporate influence. Your destination for progressive news, commentary, and interviews. TheRingOfFire.com.